We'll get started here. So we're reading 20 and 21 to finish off our adult forum study on the Gospel of John. And we read through the crucifixion and all that last week. So we begin on 20, and we have some really good questions about some of the lines. So who would like to read the very beginning, and then we'll pause and talk through?
Oh, I'll start.
Oh, you need to. Okay.
Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciples set out and went towards the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciples outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes.
Just want to point out that while it was still dark, the Gospel of John, everything is deeply symbolic. And so it's not just stating a fact that she was going early in the morning. It was dark. And remember, Nicodemus came at night. Mm-hmm. The Samaritan woman saw Jesus in broad daylight. So this is a statement about her grief and her lostness, was the fact that it was dark while she went to the tomb.
It's also the inability when they don't go into faith.
When what?
They don't go into faith to believe that he has risen from the dead. Mm-hmm. That's how the paragraph ends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They return to their homes.
Yeah, but it says at the end there, they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. So it's still like the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
All right, this is the paragraph in question.
But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at his feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid them, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her.
There's a lot of really cool things in here. So Mary alone is there at this point. And when Jesus comes and she assumes he's the gardener, I've heard this multiple times. The Gospel of John starts with, "In the beginning was the Word." It's an echo of Genesis 1, in the beginning. And we have Adam and Eve in the garden. And so there's this idea of this theme of gardens showing up. Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. There's gardens. So some people have thought that this is almost like a nod to Genesis of the new creation that is coming in Jesus. So she thinks he's the gardener, but who is he? And when does he recognize her? When does she recognize him, rather?
When he says her name.
Yes. Just like in our story today with Lazarus, it's like that Jesus' ability to call someone's name pierces through all their confusion, grief, And as the good shepherd, he knows their name and they know his voice. And that's when she recognizes him, is at the intimate calling of her name. The other thing I just read that I thought was really neat was they said when Mary went to the disciples, she didn't say, Christ is risen, he is risen indeed. It was personal. I have seen the Lord. And that's the power of the gospel, is when it's your witness. What happened to me? How did Jesus affect me? And I thought that was a really cool observation.
Yeah.
I like what you said. When she recognized him is when he said that one word. And you see that on, can you name this song and how many notes?
Yep.
Mary. And her eyes were open. That was him.
Yeah.
As soon as he said Mary. Wow.
Well, when you have a good relationship with someone, too, there's a certain way that they address you that just, clicks. That's their voice, that's their inflection of the way they talk to you.
Yeah, she knew it.
Yeah. Well, still that phrase, do not hold on to me.
Yeah.
I got my one idea is don't hold on to me the way I was. But still that doesn't sound to me like a meaningful answer. I mean, it's an answer, but
Well, I imagine too that he's back, so the people are going to assume he's staying. So he doesn't want them to think he's staying in bodily form.
okay.
Do not hold on to me because I have not yet ascended to the Father.
Right.
Because I'm leaving.
Like a child letting go of his mother. Kids
Yeah.
going off to school. You gotta let
Yeah.
go. Get on that
I
bus.
have to go to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is there a transfiguration thing going on here?
Yeah.
But go to
I don't know.
say that.
Is she gonna get beamed up with him?
yeah.
I'm sure she wants to be.
You're not ready, Mary. You're not ready. You got to stay here.
Well, this is also like Jesus basically kicking the kids out of the nest, or it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be your crutch anymore. I've taught you the lessons I came to teach you. Now it's time for you guys to go and do likewise. And I'm going off to continue my job in my work elsewhere.
Now put it back on the theologian. To you, what does it mean?
You're really hitting on it. And there's multiple things I've heard. I'm going to first tell you the worst translation of this,
Okay.
the most annoying. Is this has been preached for a long time that Jesus didn't want her to touch him because she was a woman.
No.
Ooh,
Yep.
wow.
That is
Because-
against so many parts of it.
I know. It's the whole, well, Mary Magdalene is the redeemed sinner. She's the prostitute, which isn't biblical. But because of that, this was used to say that she could not physically touch him and he didn't want her to touch him. It's not the context, but that has been taught. So I think it's good to address that, and I see your reaction going, that doesn't make sense with what we have seen of Jesus. You're right, it doesn't. The much better understandings are what you have brought up, which is he's on his way out. He's not here to stay. He doesn't want her to neither physically nor mentally, emotionally cling to him. And the idea of him, I think that's what you said, of who I am to be and who I was and everything like that. Don't get attached.
It's
Don't
not a
get
teddy bear.
attached. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
don't.
like they died years ago. Let it go. Like, move on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. So
He's going to send you.
all of these really, really good answers are kind of the different layers that have been put onto this. And one last one that I'll bring up is some people really like the idea that in the resurrection appearances, Jesus can, quote, go through walls and he can appear and disappear, but he's still physical. He can eat, you can touch him. And so sometimes they think that maybe there's something about his resurrected body that is sort of the first of its kind of what we will be, sort of some sort of a, can be physical but can also be spiritual.
Yeah.
And so they almost wondered if by her trying to grab hold of him, if that might not have worked quite the way she thought it
Like
was
in
going
the
to work.
movies where you to reach for the ghost, you can see him.
Something
you
like
hear
that.
'em, but you reach through him.
Yep.
You can't hold on to him.
Something
Can
like
freak
that.
you out.
Yeah.
Something like that. So
Maybe.
people have wondered about this, and lots of good answers.
Well, just thinking that it says, "Don't hold on to me," and she immediately sends her on a mission.
Yes.
So yeah, it is. Don't hold on to me. I've got a job for you to do.
Yes. Yes. All right. Does that feel better, Rich?
Yeah. In a way, I hear you verifying what I already had in mind.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wouldn't have thought of the first example you gave me, but that's another story.
No, that didn't come to mind.
Good.
Where did that come from?
Good. I'm
No,
glad.
quite
I'm
bad.
glad. But
The
as I've been
Judaizers back then would have
Fooling around
wanted
with the
that.
women of the
Well,
Bible.
Patriarchy.
Yeah,
doing a
well,
lot of research on this Bible study I've been writing, Women of the Bible, with that Mo's been a part of, and as I'm doing
Excellent.
research, I'm learning all sorts of stuff that I didn't know, and that was one of them, was all the bad interpretations. So anyway, if someone wants to start at 19 and take us through Thomas, I think that would be helpful.
I'll go. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jewish leaders, I imagine, right?
Yes.
Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the Twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them, and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe."
Yeah. There's a lot in here that's jumping out at me. And my favorite first thing is that Jesus came and stood among them and said, "All right, let's go get those guys who did this to me," right? No! That's what's so amazing, is that in every post-resurrection account, Jesus never mentions his death. And he doesn't mention who did it. Revenge and all of that, just, it's not on his mind. It's moving on to what needs to be. Peace be with you, multiple times. And then when he breathes on them, this is John's Pentecost. And for John, it is important because it's so intimate. It is right there, and it may not be as dramatic as Luke's Pentecost and
No
Acts.
tongues of flame.
Yeah. But this is intimate and personal, which is the way John would have it, because that's what he believes about the faith in the community. The other thing is that they were all hiding away because they were afraid, but Thomas wasn't there. What does that mean?
Thomas wasn't afraid.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe Thomas was out and about trying to figure some things out. He gets a bad rap historically. We gave him Doubting Thomas. But he doesn't behave any different from all the other disciples. The disciples don't necessarily believe Mary until they see Jesus.
Yeah.
And then Thomas doesn't believe until he sees Jesus. So how is he any different?
He's different because he sees.
Yeah, he sees.
When he does see, he really sees.
Yeah,
If you don't see, then
he sees.
Yeah.
and you still believe.
And
Well-
how does he go a week? How can a week possibly pass by? I mean, it seems like
Mm.
you would just, every second of the day would be spent trying to find Jesus. How does he not find him for a week?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That just seems weird.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Maybe
probably
more interesting
fishing.
question is, why didn't Jesus find him?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Give him some time to think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe he was gone that whole week, and Jesus was waiting for him to come back with the disciples before.
What was the morning time in Jews' religion at that time? 7 days morning? After up to 365 days of mourning.
Hmm.
So there's a mourning period that they have to go through
Okay,
with their
I've been
families.
to, sure.
that's good.
I don't know how many days it is.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for Thomas's role as the doubter. I mean, yeah, they all had their doubts. They all didn't quite believe right away. But anyone who's considering coming into the faith, I mean, there should be some level of doubt and skepticism and coming to terms with the nature of our faith. I mean, you don't want to just be blindly going into this, or you're going to just be as easily swayed out of it. So,
It's like that's also the function of the Nicodemus character in the story too.
Yeah.
We got somebody who's a member of the religious orthodoxy too, who's a high up guy who really knows his stuff, who also came to believe.
Yeah.
and
And earlier on.
And there are other characters still that we've already talked about who didn't know who he was or had their doubts, as well as people who came in and right away were already with it, like the woman who came up asking about the scraps of faith to gain healing for her son, I think it was.
Daughter, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where some people were right there with him, eager to believe, and there's a place for everyone. It's we should. I mean, it kind of points to the whole aspect of just because you may have doubts doesn't make you a heretic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, in some ways, Thomas's testimony too.
Mm-hmm.
He saw, he believed, so we can see, well, if he was persuaded, maybe we should be too.
If you think of him as playing a role that John wanted the community to understand and to say, hey, look, there were some faithful people who didn't get it right away, and that's okay. But then as soon as how does he respond? You're exactly right, my Lord and my God. So he sees in the spiritual sense of the word. And then Jesus, I really like this because it almost sounds like Jesus is going, oh, blessed are the people who don't see. But a more generous interpretation of that is where Jesus is sort of turning to the audience, that gathered John community, many of whom never would have met him, and said, you who are going through a hard time, you haven't seen me, but you're here persevering through being kicked out of the synagogue, being exiled from your family, being called heretics. You, blessed are you. And you can just imagine them going, okay, we didn't see,
Yeah.
but we believe, and Jesus just gave us a blessing, which is much more generous than going, well, scolding Thomas or something, which...
That's a super good point, because the whole conceit of an aside to the audience is just something we don't do nowadays.
Right.
I mean, you see that up through like this, about the 18th century in a lot of writing, and you just don't see it now. It's just weird if you see it in like a modern play. People are like, why is he talking to the audience, breaking the fourth wall? But they did it all the time.
Yeah,
And a
that's
Greek
true.
chorus was a very normal thing, and now it looks weird. You go,
Breaking the fourth wall. That's
Yeah.
a great term.
they did that all the time.
Yeah, where
And
you...
now we think that's like lame. We think
Yeah.
lazy writing. No, that they did
Can
that
you
all the time.
explain that?
So
in
in a
case people
play,
don't know?
in a traditional theater, there's 3 walls.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
2 side walls, the people walk in this way, and there's the back of the theater. But the 4th wall is the front of the theater where the audience is out here. It's an invisible wall. When you break the 4th wall, you're talking through it facing the audience,
Yeah.
I did not know.
acknowledging they're there.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So Shakespeare is probably the easiest example because we're all
That's what I
pretty
was thinking
familiar with him.
Yeah.
When Hamlet gives his To Be or Not to Be speech, it's directed at the audience.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of soliloquies. He's talking to the audience. And frankly, too, it's weird. You get a lot of actors trying to figure out how to portray this. Because, like, why is he talking to himself at great length? He's not. He's talking to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
We think that's weird, but they didn't, because that's just what they did.
mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
And people did that. In the Greek tradition, they had a whole group of people who would talk.
The chorus.
The chorus.
Of course.
That was their job, to talk to the audience.
Yeah. And we're
And
so
they just
not
look weird.
we're so not used to that as modern Christians that when Jesus breaks the fourth wall, as he does a couple times in the gospel, He even talks about things that haven't happened, you know. He's like, blessed are you when you're kicked out of the synagogue, right? Like, if he was just talking to the disciples, they'd be like, what are you talking about, Jesus? He was directing his comments to the audience. And,
You know
and
about that.
yeah, and we're so not used to that we skip over it, or we kind of mentally adjust it in our brain.
And I never even thought until you mentioned that this could be a fourth wall breaking thing, a deliberate.
Yeah.
He's really empathizing the holes in his hands, the cut in his side, his
Yeah.
feet,
Yeah.
and the scouring that he went through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though you'll never see it, you come to believe. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
We still have one of my favorite parts coming up. So if someone wants to start at 30 and take us into the next chapter, we've got Peter on the beach.
I can go.
Okay.
Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon, Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon and Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach. But the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, Children, you have no fish, have you? They answered him, No. He said to them, Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, Come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, Who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my lambs. A 2nd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the 3rd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt hurt because he said to him the 3rd time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, Follow me.
Okay, let's just stop there for a bit. So in the very beginning of the gospel, when Jesus was recruiting his disciples, he said, Come and see. So their job as a disciple was to literally follow behind Jesus and to try to see deeply in their spirit who God was and what was going on, and to be connected with God, to observe, to work on that relationship. And now the call has changed. The call now to follow Jesus is feed my lambs. So he's giving them the role of the good shepherd that he had earlier, when he fed the 5,000 people, when he made the wedding of Cana, all those things that he did, he's now turning over. This is how you're going to follow me, is by feeding my lambs and feeding my sheep. So that's a huge shift from, being the doe-eyed observer to actively taking on the work that Jesus was doing himself. So, yeah.
Why was Peter naked?
Because he was fishing.
Well, actually, he's
you fish naked?
his breeches. They had
The
the,
loincloth.
They
had the
fished
outer,
like that.
Is
he
it just
had
really
the outer
hot?
cloth.
Okay.
He had his Speedos on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was like,
they had the
Because
outer,
they're
outer
fishing.
garment and then they had the
Okay.
inner garment.
So they just get all wet
Because
and hot
of the
and
Jewish
stuff. So,
tradition, you
okay.
could never be naked.
And it's hot out there,
So,
and you're fishing all night. And
Sure, all right. That just struck me this time.
Well-
We're just a bunch of guys, so.
Sure.
Yeah, well,
It
still,
did
I
sound
think,
the opposite of putting clothes on when he jumped in the water.
yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah.
I would think it's usually when you jump in the water, you want less on.
Yeah.
Not more.
Well, he wanted Jesus to see him dressed.
Yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
I could see, like, oh.
no.
And going back to Genesis there, like, oh, it's so.
I'll throw
Yeah.
in another side, and I don't know if I'm right on this. If you notice, I've always wondered, why did they have to make the point it was a charcoal fire?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure of this, but I think back then they burnt animal feces like people in the plains did
Yeah,
for fuel.
yeah.
Probably.
dried
At least
dung.
not wanting that.
And, well, there's not that many trees there.
That too.
It's different kind of whatever. And so that occurred to me that something's good about this fire. It's a charcoal fire.
It tastes better.
You can pull out one of your books and check that out. If that makes any
Yeah.
big difference. I just think it's a good
Interesting.
fire.
Wasn't there the line somewhere about touching the coal to the lips?
That's
Yeah, Isaiah. It's
Isaiah.
called
I saw the
Isaiah.
Lord.
Yeah.
And he says to him, "You have no fish, do you?"
No,
Question mark. I never saw that before. Question mark. You don't have any fish, do you guys?
no.
No. How do you know that? They're all over here.
Boats, maybe the boat's riding high in the waves.
Yeah.
And he calls them children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're having, the breakfast with fish and bread, which may have been normal, but that's an echo of the feeding of the 5,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the nets full of fish was, again, that abundance. It's just that reminder. When Jesus shows up, there's just abundance that happens, and that's probably a signal, though they didn't recognize him. They're like, yeah, this is definitely Jesus.
Miraculously catch enough fish for breakfast. They miraculously
Yeah.
catch way too many fish.
Yeah.
I mean, it's abundance for them. I don't know if it's abundance for the fish.
Right,
The
right.
fish may have had a
Something
different
else
opinion.
for them.
It
Who
reminded
was it?
me a little too, of the Last Supper, where Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them.
Yes.
I like that.
Yes.
The
And he
disciple
said,
whom
"Come
Jesus
eat."
loved. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. Who was that disciple?
John, right?
That was used like 7 times, the disciple who Jesus loved, starting with the Last Supper. The
Yep.
disciple who Jesus loved sat next to him. When
Pastor
Peter went up
talked
to the
about
gate,
that a few weeks ago.
there's about seven times in there. You heard that before?
Yeah,
Is that-
and I always
is that
assumed it was
John?
John, but Pastor Siri actually said there's a bunch of theories.
Well, in our gospel today that we're going to read in church, which you were present for, in the raising of Lazarus, how did they describe Lazarus multiple times? The
that
one
Jesus
whom you
loved.
love. So there's a couple theories, the most common of which is that it's John, because that's the one who's writing, and that's who it's named after. But it's always good for us to remember that the name of the book wasn't necessarily the author, but rather maybe the community off of which it was based. So there's a lot more going into it than just being as literal as we like to think. Because now, if we were going to write a book, you'd be like, serious testimony. Well, that's pretty straightforward. It's not written by you or whatever. And if it was, you'd say it. You'd say, this is Kristen's interpretation of Siri's perspective, right?
At one time I thought it was Judas.
Oh.
Because when Peter went up and followed Jesus to the gate, Jesus wasn't the only disciple.
Mm-hmm.
The one who Jesus loved, Peter stayed in the courtyard, or didn't really get into the courtyard yet, but the one Jesus loved was in the room with Jesus with the hierarchies, because he knew them all. That's what Judas knew them all, because he sold them. And he came out and got the servant girl, the one who Jesus loved, came out, asked the servant girl to bring Peter into the courtyard, So Peter wasn't the only apostle that went up. It was hired this other one, the one who Jesus loved. Is that Judas? Because he would know the high guys. He would know all these people. He had the money. He was. But no, I've heard before that. No, it was probably John, because this is who wrote the book, and referring to himself as the one who Jesus loved.
Then he wasn't very humble, was he?
Yeah.
Then the Power of Lazarus. Now that's a new one there too.
That's interesting.
And it could have been, you know, for all we know, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus co-founded the John community, and this is the next generation, and they're writing what they have heard from
John.
Yeah.
Mary, Martha, and John, possibly. So it's good for us to give a little bit of a mystery, because if they knew, I always say this, if the writers of these Gospels knew that 2,000 years ago, on a continent they didn't even know existed, people would be reading their works in a different language, they would have explained a few things.
Yeah.
Yes.
But because they didn't, we have to do our best to look back and interpret with a grain of salt. So.
Or are we supposed to let the Holy Spirit, like tongues, come upon us and know
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It
And
does
maybe
feel
try
a bit
The Holy Spirit will
contradictory
explain it,
when
yeah.
he says the one who Jesus loved, because Jesus is supposed to love everyone.
Well, that's the other interesting possibility. What if it's meant to be an amalgam and sort of a representation of the reader?
Yes.
About what?
The reader.
That's yes.
You know, someone we can, an avatar for ourselves.
Yes.
Someone who's in whose feet we can put ourselves.
Yeah, I think you've got it. I think that is a genuine other interpretation, and I think that's great. Let's just read. Kirsten, do you want to read that last little section there?
Let's see, verse 20, I think. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who has testified to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. There are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. That would be
That's
a very
great
big book.
ending. That's a great ending.
That's what they say down at the University of Minnesota. You got sections of Shakespeare, you know, a dozen books. You go into the Bible, it's 3 walls down at the University of Minnesota. What's been written in comments on the Bible.
Oh, I can believe that.
Yeah, this is obviously answering a question that was contemporary to the writer. You know, like it feels a little weird to end the gospel with, you know, well, what about this guy? Is he going to die? And
Yeah.
and
Who
we
is
know
that
all
guy?
of these people are long dead, you know. But that was clearly in that community. It was trying to answer a myth or a posing question that everybody had. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why? I don't even understand the context. Why is Peter saying, "Lord, what about him? What about him?" So he was there too, okay? Like, I don't get it. Why is Peter even questioning it, that disciple is there?
Yeah,
Following
this
them.
is. It's a little. It feels a little weird for us because we want to believe that everything here actually happened exactly this way, but this could be again that the writer is putting the dialogue back onto Jesus and Peter to answer a question for the community, which is maybe that this disciple was still alive at the time when this was being written, and everyone was wondering if he was immortal. And maybe he just died and everyone was like, wait, I thought he was supposed to be immortal. And they go, nope, Jesus did not say he would not die. But if it is my will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? And so they're like, oh, okay, all right, well, I shouldn't worry about it. It's not like something's wrong that this man finally died.
It was just Jesus being his usual enigmatic self.
Yeah, so...
And so what is it your choice?
I'm also thinking of the movies where all of a sudden you come to the ending and they tie up a few loose ends at the very end. It's like you don't go away from the movie, well, what happened to that or what happened to that.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of that too. And there's some movies I think because they're running out of time or they had to cut the budget, they just chop it off.
Yeah.
And
At the very end of the credits, there's a couple of cards saying, "Oh, and the so and so went to college, and then
That happens
Yeah,
too.
yeah, I always love that myself.
these two people got married, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking of as a literary
found the dog."
thing.
Whatever.
That'd be as a literary comment, maybe.
Because you can imagine throughout this whole gospel, the writer was weaving these stories together in a way that was also answering the fears and the questions and the situation of that people at that time, just like Matthew, Mark, and Luke were doing for their communities. And apparently this was the lingering question. What about this guy? And so he just wrapped that up. But it doesn't have super strong significance for us, and that's okay.
Yeah, if there was some rumor about somebody, there were a lot of there. I think you should remember reading there were a lot of rumors about when Jesus would come back, and so if that was pinned to somebody surviving to see the second coming, and the second coming wasn't coming, there would have been a lot of people trying to
Figure it out.
how these things work together, and they're trying to resolve that. It's probably an attempt to resolve that.
So they thought they'd
Don't
come
worry
back
about
right
it.
away.
Very soon.
But then wasn't it
Yeah.
like 30 years later, they said we better start writing this stuff down?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Because we don't know when he's coming.
yeah, I
We
mean,
might not still be
We're not going to
alive.
be here to talk about it. We better start writing this stuff down.
We got to pass it on.
Was it, how soon did they start writing then? You think the earlier stuff is 30 years, I guess,
yeah, I
after
mean,
he died.
There may have been other documents that have been lost.
Yeah.
We don't know that.
They're still
But
looking.
what I do know is what you just said. It sounds, makes sense to us. I'm also thinking of what Billy Graham once said about the Apostle Paul. That if Paul really knew what he had to go through in advance, he wouldn't have done it.
Probably
But
not.
rather he took it just little by little, step by step. There was, and then, to have the opportunity to have that written down. And so there's something even for the disciples here. Believe. You haven't seen me yet. Believe. I'm just drawing together this analogy that they didn't know what they're going to go through. Some of them did, but they really don't until you go through it. And then you need the reassurance. You need the whatever it is to carry you through to the next step.
I will share one thing I learned recently, and that was that in this time, in the first 100 years in the early church, there were so many different communities, and they were all working out what Christianity was, and they were in dialogue with each other, but there was a lot of diversity.
Yeah.
So there certainly was not one idea at all, but also that they put the spoken word above written word. A lot of people, even though they're educated, were leery of written down accounts. And they believed more in a person's testimony. Now, it may have been that it wasn't until that first generation of witnesses started dying that they realized they should write this down because they weren't going to have the first witness account. And there were way more writings and gospels, way more than what made it in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't solidified till a couple hundred years afterwards. But yeah, you're right. There was a reason they started to write things down, but for quite a while they didn't. That was just how they.
How
Yeah.
everyone interpreted it.
It was that culture. It was
Yeah.
that culture was.
This one sounds a little different than this one
Yeah.
because he put in his own little whatever.
It's like
Yeah.
us when we sit down in our different groups. So there's other Bible studies going on all over right now. They'll end up with a little different conclusions than what we're having here. And so in a similar respect back then, they are seriously, intently working it out. But I also recall from early Christian history, they fought over it. They literally,
Yeah.
we're right and you're wrong.
They're
Still
still
are.
doing it.
Yeah, really, didn't know that.
That's what makes a family.
Oh,
Fighting. Why do you yell at me like that? But why do you say things like, because you're family, I love you.
yeah,
You can't talk that way to a friend. You wouldn't have any.
yeah.
So you know you're family when somebody yells at you.
Yeah.
That's the church. Yelling.
Well, you wouldn't fight her if it didn't matter.
That's another
Correct.
thing. If
It was
doesn't
very
matter,
personal, very concerning.
very real.
And you don't want to lose anybody in your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, for some reason I can't find it now where Jesus says, when you were talking about feed my sheep, feed my lambs. I thought you were going to bring up that part about the agape, what's the other word for love?
Philios
Yeah,
is agape.
because
philios.
the first two times Jesus asks him, "Do you agape me? Do you love me?" You know, the fullest. And Peter's response is, "The filio," is the word used. Yes, I love you, but not all the way. And finally, the third time Jesus then says, "Will you filio me?"
That's interesting.
Yes, I feel you. In other words, he's willing to accept what we're able to give. You don't know if you're going to put your life on the line until it actually happens.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself giving it all.